At my sister's wedding, she stole my achievements. I paid for everything: medical bills, rent. My parents teared up. "You're a saint," they said. Then she smirked. "Unlike me, my sister is a total failure." The room erupted in laughter. My hands trembled, but I paid for everything. Then, something unexpected happened. On a snowy winter night in Boston, Abigail Carter gazed out of her office window while reviewing the final accounting report. The city lights, seen from the 38th floor of the high-rise, shone in an orderly fashion, much like her own life. Abigail had worked at Harper Financial for 15 years as a senior manager in the accounting department. Her meticulous attention to detail and dedication to her work were well known throughout the company. But tonight, her concentration was unusually broken. "Working late again, Abigail. You're such a workaholic," her colleague Sarah said, standing in front of her desk, dressed in an elegant outfit, clearly heading to a party. "Yes, I'm checking the quarterly financial report. It needs to be on the president's desk by Monday morning," Abigail answered with a smile. "But tonight is Freeman's farewell party." "It's a shame you're missing it after being invited," Sarah said, looking disappointed. "I'm sorry, but I also have a consultation about my father's new treatment." Abigail's voice trailed off. Sarah nodded understandingly and said, "I hope your father gets better," before leaving. Abigail turned back to her screen, but then her phone rang. The screen showed the name, Sophie. She took a deep breath before answering. "Hey, Abby, I'm at this lovely restaurant with James. His parents are here too." Her sister Sophie's voice was filled with excitement. "That sounds wonderful," Abigail responded gently. "So, what do you think about that quote from the wedding planner? I want to change to Western Gardens. It would look better on Instagram. And James's mum says it would be absolutely perfect." Abigail quietly looked up at the ceiling. Western Gardens was one of the most expensive wedding venues in the city. "Sophie, we've talked about this before. There's a limit to the budget. Oh, don't be so stingy. This is a once-in-a-lifetime event. Besides, after everything I've done for Mum and Dad, don't I deserve to splurge a little?" Sophie's voice was tinged with dissatisfaction. Abigail resisted the urge to sigh. 3 years ago, when her father Henry suffered from a serious heart condition, she had covered all the expensive medical treatments that insurance wouldn't pay for. Her mother Clara had quit her job to take care of him, so Abigail was also paying their apartment rent. However, she hadn't told her parents about this. She had said that the insurance company made special arrangements when, in reality, she had been dipping into her own savings and investments. "All right, Sophie, but let me review the budget one more time before making a final decision," Abigail said. After hanging up, she sank deeply into her chair with a tired expression. Sophie was pursuing her dream of becoming a fashion designer. She had talent, but hadn't yet achieved significant success. Nevertheless, she acted as if she was supporting the family when, in fact, she only sent a small amount of money to their parents each month. Abigail's smartphone rang again. This time, it was a video call from her mother. "Good evening, Mom." Abigail greeted her with a gentle smile. "Still working? You're such a hard worker." Clara's face showed a mixture of affection and concern. "Sophie said she called you. The wedding preparations must be keeping you busy." "Yes, we were just discussing the budget." "That girl always has such big dreams." Clara smiled. "But she's really a good daughter. Last week, she sent money for your father's new medication. She told us, 'Don't worry, I'll take care of it.'" Abigail maintained her composure. That medication money had actually been paid by her. Sophie had always claimed Abigail's financial help as her own. "How is Dad feeling?" Abigail changed the subject. "He's getting better, really." If Sophie hadn't found that specialist. Clara's eyes welled up with tears. Abigail remained silent. She was the one who had found the specialist and paid the expensive initial consultation fee. She simply nodded and said, "That's good to hear." After the call ended, Abigail took a family photo from her desk drawer. It showed her parents, herself, and Sophie. As she traced her finger over the photo, she wondered why she didn't tell the truth. Why did she allow Sophie's lies? The answer was simple. She wanted to preserve family peace. Sophie had always been the parents' favorite, while Abigail had settled into the role of the responsible older sister. Exposing Sophie's deception might hurt her parents, especially now. Her father's health was the top priority. Abigail received a message on her smartphone. It was from James Wilson, Sophie's fiancé. Abigail, do you have time tomorrow afternoon? There's something I'd like to discuss with you. Abigail was a bit surprised. She had only met James a few times and had never received a personal message from him before. He was an investment banker from a wealthy family. He seemed polite and sincere, yet quite the opposite of Sophie in personality. Of course. How about 2:00 p.m.? Abigail replied. While thinking about tomorrow's meeting, Abigail finished the final report. The clock had already passed 10 p.m. She could have been considered for a promotion, but since her father's illness, she had repeatedly turned down positions that required business trips and overtime, all to be there for her family. Outside, the snow was falling heavily. Abigail put on her coat and left the office. On her way back to her apartment, she called her grandmother Lillian. Her grandmother was the only person in the family who knew about Abigail's sacrifices. "Grandma, can you talk now?" "Abigail, I was just doing some knitting." Her grandmother's warm voice came through the phone. "Sophie's wedding preparations have started," Abigail said. "I see. Is she still taking credit for your sacrifices?" Lillian's voice carried a reproachful tone. "It can't be helped, as long as everyone is happy." "But what about you, Abigail? You need to care for your own life too." Her grandmother's voice was filled with concern. Abigail stopped walking and sat on a snow-covered park bench. "I'm fine. It's just, sometimes, I get tired having to stay strong all the time. The truth will eventually come to light," Lillian said, "and sometimes that truth comes in unexpected ways." Abigail looked up at the snowy sky, pondering her grandmother's words. Sophie's wedding was just a month away. Under the sparkling chandeliers at the bridal shop, Sophie was trying on a wedding dress. Wrapped in pure white, she truly looked beautiful. Tears welled up in Clara's eyes as she repeated, "You look like an angel." Abigail smiled quietly while continuing her calculations as she looked over sample invitations. "Abigail, look, isn't this tiara gorgeous?" Sophie placed a dazzlingly jeweled tiara on her head. "It's only $3,800. Can I get it?" Abigail frowned. "Sophie, we're already over budget. We've exceeded the initial estimate by more than $20,000. "Oh, Abby, you're so stingy. This is my special day." Sophie pouted and looked to her mother for support. Clara looked at Abigail with a confused expression. "Can't we stretch the budget a little, considering everything Sophie has done for us?" Abigail felt a pain in her chest. What Sophie had supposedly done for her parents was built on lies about Abigail's own sacrifices. Nevertheless, she quietly took a deep breath and said, "All right, I'll figure something out." That night, Abigail liquidated more of her mutual funds, dipping into money she had set aside for her own future. Her dream of buying a condominium, which she had been planning for years, became even more distant. 2 weeks before the wedding, Abigail was accompanying her father to an appointment with his primary physician. Henry's condition was stable, but still required attention. As they left the examination room, a man stood up from the waiting area. It was James. "Hello, Abigail." He politely extended his hand. "James, why are you here?" Abigail was surprised. "Actually, I came to check on Henry's condition. I was worried that the stress of the wedding might affect him." James's eyes showed genuine concern. "That's very thoughtful of you." Abigail thanked him but found it strange. Sophie shouldn't have told James much about her father's condition. When they moved to a nearby cafe, James carefully began asking questions. "Abigail, I hope I'm not being rude, but how have Henry's medical expenses been handled these past 3 years?" Abigail hesitated for a moment. "Insurance and some special programs." James nodded quietly. "Sophie told me she was covering most of it." Abigail went pale. She was uncertain how to respond. Telling the truth might damage Sophie and James's relationship, however. Lying went against her nature. "The details are complicated," she finally said. "What matters is that my father is receiving the best treatment." James stared at her intently. "I understand. Thank you." There was a flicker of something in his eyes. At the rehearsal dinner the day before the wedding, the luxurious terrace of Western Gardens was bathed in the sunset, glowing pink and gold. Relatives and close friends gathered, chatting with champagne glasses in hand. Sophie, dressed in a shimmering salmon-pink dress, was smiling happily. "Everyone, these are my parents. My father suffered a serious illness 3 years ago, but he has recovered enough to attend my wedding today." The gathered people applauded warmly, and Sophie continued, "This was all possible because I worked hard to ensure he received the best treatment. Sometimes I was juggling my design work with 3 part-time jobs." Abigail froze. She knew Sophie lied, but she never expected her to do so boldly in public. She quietly put down her champagne glass and moved to a corner of the terrace. "Abigail," a voice came from behind her. It was Charles Wilson, James's father, a dignified lawyer whose grey hair matched his well-fitted tuxedo. "Your sister is quite remarkable. It's rare to find someone who would sacrifice so much for their family." Abigail forced a smile. "Yes, Sophie is special. You must be very proud. How fortunate to have such a dedicated person in your family." Abigail's lips trembled. "Actually, Uncle Charles," Sophie suddenly interrupted, "James's mom is looking for you. She wants to discuss the interior design of the new house." She gave Abigail a quick glance before leading Charles away. Abigail let out a deep sigh. Looking up at the twilight sky, she saw the first star beginning to shine. She walked toward the table where her grandmother Lillian was sitting. "Are you all right?" Lillian asked, seeing her granddaughter's expression. "Yes, it's the usual," Abigail answered. "I'm just afraid that Sophie's lies keep getting bigger. She will have to face the consequences of her actions," Lillian said with wise eyes. "When the time comes, the truth will be revealed." "But when?" Abigail whispered. "Tomorrow is her special day. I don't want to ruin anything." Her grandmother quietly held Abigail's hand. "In life, there are things you can choose and things you cannot. All we can do is watch and wait." That night, back in her hotel room, Abigail stood by the window, gazing at the stars. Tomorrow, her sister would take a new step in life. She silently prayed, "May this wedding end peacefully, and when the truth eventually comes to light, may our family bonds remain intact." Western Gardens was adorned with blooming white roses and pale pink orchids, filled with 400 guests. The ceremony went perfectly, and Sophie radiated in her wedding dress. As the evening reception began, champagne and hors d'oeuvre were served continuously. Abigail, dressed in a light blue gown as the maid of honor, maintained a gentle smile, though complex emotions stirred within her. She was determined to celebrate her sister's special day. "It's time for the speeches," the host announced with microphone in hand. "First, we'll hear from the bride's sister, Abigail Carter." Abigail took a deep breath and accepted the microphone. "Sophie, James, the first sincerely congratulate you on your new beginning," she began calmly. "As a sister, I've watched Sophie grow. Her passion and determination have always amazed me. James, you found a wonderful partner. I believe you will make Sophie happy." Warm applause rose from the audience as Abigail quietly returned to her seat. Next, fathers from both families and friends gave their speeches. Finally, Sophie herself stood up. She took the microphone with a beautiful smile. "Thank you all for coming today," Sophie said with a radiant smile. "I especially want to thank my parents. Dad, Mom, thank you for always believing in me and supporting me." Her parents smiled with tears in their eyes. "But there's something you all don't know yet." Sophie suddenly changed her tone, assuming a dramatic expression. 3 years ago, my father suffered from a serious heart condition. We needed expensive medical treatment that insurance wouldn't cover, and Mom had to quit her job." Abigail froze. She understood with terrifying clarity where Sophie was heading with this. "At that time, I made a decision." Tears welled up in Sophie's eyes. Abigail knew they were staged tears. "For these 3 years, I paid for everything: Dad's medical bills, their rent. Sometimes I couldn't even sleep at night, but I kept going because it was for my family." Murmurs of surprise spread through the venue. Her parents were even more moved, with Clara beginning to cry out loud, "You're truly a saint, our angel." Abigail took a sip of water to hide her distress. Her hands were trembling. Across the table, she could see her grandmother Lillian's expression, suddenly turning stern. "Thank you, but I only did what was natural for my family," Sophie continued with false modesty. Then, suddenly, her gaze turned to Abigail. "But my sister Abigail is quite the opposite." The venue fell silent. "She works for a big corporation but never lifted a finger to help the family, always making excuses about being busy." Sophie sneered. "She's really a good-for-nothing, isn't she?" she added with a laugh. The venue filled with tense laughter. The blood drained from Abigail's face. Her parents looked at Abigail with confused expressions. James frowned, clearly showing his discomfort. Something crumbled inside Abigail. She felt the wall of patience and sacrifice she had built over the years collapsing. She slowly stood up, but her voice trembled. I was the one paying for everything. The venue fell completely silent. A smile momentarily vanished from Sophie's face before she quickly tried to recover. Abby, you can't take a joke. Today is my day. Don't be selfish. I paid for everything. Abigail's voice grew slightly stronger. For 3 years, I've been paying for Dad's treatment and our parents' rent, using my savings and investments. You only send a small amount of money each month and falsely claimed it as your achievement. Sophie's face turned bright red. Liar. But you don't have any proof. The venue began to stir in confusion. Henry and Clara looked at their daughters in astonishment. Suddenly, James stood up and took the microphone. The venue fell silent again. I'm sorry, but I must speak the truth. His voice was calm, but determination shone in his eyes. Before getting married, I conducted an investigation to understand the family's financial situation. What I discovered was, James pulled out a file. What Abigail is saying is true. The color drained from Sophie's face. James, why are you embarrassing me? Her voice trembled. James answered gently but firmly. Sophie, I love you. That's precisely why I don't want to start our marriage on lies. If we don't clear everything up today, we have no future. He looked at Abigail. Please continue. Abigail took a deep breath and accepted the microphone. The room fell completely silent. I didn't do it to be recognized, she began quietly. I just wanted to help my family. When Dad collapsed, I had savings. I had been planning to buy an office for my promotion, but that could wait. Dad's life couldn't. Abigail looked toward her parents. Mom, Dad, I didn't want to worry you, so I said it was a special program from the insurance company. In reality, it was my savings and investments. Sophie did help a little, but it's a lie. Sophie suddenly stood up. It's all her lies. I worked 3 jobs. Sophie, James quietly interrupted. Bank records don't lie. Clara stood up with a shocked expression. Sophie, why did you lie? I didn't lie. Sophie began to cry. I did my best too. Abigail is always perfect, always praised. I wanted to be recognized too. An uncomfortable atmosphere filled the venue. Abigail felt Sophie's pain. She quietly adjusted the microphone. Today, all I want is the truth, Abigail said calmly. Not to blame anyone, but to live honestly. Sophie, you're my sister. I understand your desire to be recognized, but taking credit for someone else's sacrifice and contributions is wrong. Henry removed his glasses with trembling hands. I didn't know anything. His voice shook. Abigail, why didn't you tell us? Dad's recovery was the top priority, Abigail answered gently. And, to be honest, she hesitated for a moment. You and Mom have always given Sophie special treatment. I felt that no matter what I did, I could never match Sophie's brilliance, so I chose not to say anything. Tears flowed from Clara's eyes. Abigail, she was at a loss for words. Grandmother Lillian slowly stood up and stood next to Abigail. I have witnessed Abigail's struggles. She declined promotion opportunities many times, used her savings meant for her future, and never uttered a word of complaint. She did this out of love, but I cannot overlook someone else taking credit for her sacrifice. Sophie collapsed into her chair, covering her face with her hands. I am ashamed. Her voice was faint. James carefully sat next to Sophie. His expression showed not anger, but deep sadness. Why didn't you tell me the truth? Because I wanted you to love me, Sophie answered in a small voice. Your family is wealthy and respectable. I felt inadequate, so I wanted you to think that at least I had something to be proud of. James sighed. I wanted to love you for who you are, not for lies or pretenses. Abigail quietly stepped forward. I revealed everything today, not to hurt Sophie, she said with a serious expression. I want us to move forward as a family, standing on truth. Sophie, I love you. You are talented, passionate, and a wonderful sister. You don't need lies or pretenses. Clara and Henry stood up and approached Abigail. I'm sorry, Abigail, Henry said with a trembling voice. To think you did so much for us, and we didn't notice. We took you for granted, Clara said tearfully. Our reliable eldest daughter, always dependable, but we never considered how much you were sacrificing behind the scenes. Abigail embraced her parents. Years of suppressed emotions were released, and tears flowed from her eyes. Sophie slowly stood up. Her makeup was ruined by tears, but there was something new in her expression. She approached Abigail with trembling legs and knelt before her. "Abigail, I'm truly sorry." Her voice choked. "I kept lying because I wanted to prove my worth, but that was wrong. Taking credit for your sacrifices is unforgivable." Abigail raised Sophie up and embraced her. "Sophie, you have value just as you are. You don't need lies or pretenses." James slowly approached the two. "Sophie, I still want to marry you," he said quietly. "But from now on, I want to build our relationship on honesty and truth." The people at the venue were breathless at this unexpected turn of events. Some were wiping away tears. Everyone felt they were witnessing not just a wedding reception, but a moment of truth for a family. Grandmother Lillian placed her hand on Abigail's shoulder. "The truth always comes to light eventually, and today is that day." Abigail nodded. She felt the burden that had weighed on her heart for years becoming lighter. No more lies or pretenses. The family would now take a new step forward. The host awkwardly took the microphone. "Well then, to celebrate the new beginning of these two," James said calmly, "today didn't go as planned, but this is part of our lives. I think it's rather meaningful, as the start of a marriage that values honesty and truth." He took Sophie's hand, and she timidly responded. Abigail sensed that while there were wounds between them, they were wounds that could heal. The reception quietly resumed. On the surface, it continued as a normal wedding reception, but everyone present felt they had witnessed an important turning point. That concludes Emily's report. The numbers for the fourth quarter are quite impressive. Abigail smiled at the head of the conference table. Her new office was on the 42nd floor of Harper Financial, with a panoramic view of Boston. 6 months after the wedding, she had finally been promoted to vice president of the finance division. As the meeting ended, Abigail checked her watch. There was still plenty of time to visit her parents. She put on her coat and left the office. On a March afternoon, with melting snow and hints of spring, Abigail rang the doorbell of her parents' apartment. Her father Henry opened the door. His complexion was good, clearly showing he had regained his health. "Abigail," he warmly embraced his daughter. Perfect timing. Everyone's waiting in the living room. Clara was preparing dinner. Grandmother Lillian was relaxing on the sofa, and Sophie and James were there too. "Abi." Sophie stood up and hugged her sister. She was dressed more simply than before, and her expression had softened. Many things had changed since that night. Her parents, now aware of Abigail's sacrifices, expressed deep gratitude while apologizing for their years of unconscious bias. Sophie had started therapy, seriously addressing her self-worth issues. She and James had a small, family-only ceremony the week after the wedding. "Can I see your new work?" Abigail asked Sophie. Sophie smiled and took out her sketchbook. She had started her fashion brand on a small scale and was now aiming for success through genuine skill. "It's still small, but I'm getting real customers." "That's wonderful," Abigail said sincerely. The sisters' relationship had been gradually repaired, creating an even closer bond than before. "Dinner is ready," Clara called out. She had changed too. Her approach to her daughters had become more equal, and she now seriously listened to Abigail's work and achievements. As they sat at the table, Henry cleared his throat. "Actually, today is a special day. We want to celebrate Abigail's promotion and Sophie's first commercial design being accepted." The parents looked proudly at both daughters. Gone was the one-sided favoritism of before. They now celebrated each daughter's success equally. Grandmother Lillian raised her champagne glass. "The courage to acknowledge mistakes, forgive, and stand on truth is what strengthens a family," she said with wise eyes. "We have learned from our failures and built better relationships." Everyone clinked glasses. Abigail and Sophie exchanged glances and smiled quietly at each other. There was no shadow of former competition or jealousy. What remained was mutual understanding and respect. James held Sophie's hand. Their relationship, too, had been rebuilt on honesty. "Actually, we have one more announcement," he smiled. "We're having a baby." Cheers erupted, and words of blessing were offered. Abigail felt genuinely happy. She herself had recently started dating Daniel from the legal department of her company. Life was full of new possibilities. As the sky began to turn sunset red, Abigail stepped out onto the balcony. The pain and sacrifices of the past weren't completely gone, but they had strengthened her and made her appreciate her current happiness more deeply. Thinking alone, her grandmother stood beside her. "Yes, I was thinking about how everything has changed," Abigail answered. "Truth has the power to liberate," Lillian said quietly. Abigail nodded. She understood that sometimes the most unexpected events bring about the most necessary changes.